You good?
Okay,
Yep.
cool. So we're going to have an official debate. We have Jacob here, we have CaptainNatsu. For this debate, CaptainNatsu is going to be taking the position that Bill C-16 is a bad law, and Jacob is going to be taking the opposition. As always, winner will be based upon who concedes. If no concessions heard, we'll put it to a voting poll in which you, the audience, can vote on who you think won the debate. You guys can get started.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Stone. Captain. So I would offer the floor to you, but I kind of want to just make a brief statement about, kind of like I appreciate you debating me, and sort of what I wanted to sort of frame this debate. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there about Bill C-16. This is a law that passed in Canada a few years ago now. And there is still on the internet lingering misinformation. I think a lot of this misinformation stems from Jordan Peterson's stand against it. So Dr. Jordan Peterson is a psychology professor at U of T, University of Toronto. He taught some online courses and put his lectures on YouTube, got famous. But really the sort of catalyst for his fame that launched him onto the international stage was his stand. He took this stand on Bill C-16, where he said it was, to use CaptainNatsu's phrasing, a bad law. I think this stand is based on misinformation, whether consciously or unconsciously by Jordan Peterson. I think that once we look at what this law does, we can see that it's quite reasonable and it offers protections to trans people that we already grant to many other minority groups in our society, such as religious groups, ethnic groups, racial groups, people's sexual orientation. All Bill C-16 does is extend these protections to gender identity and gender expression.
Okay. Well, okay, I would agree that there is a lot of misinformation about Bill C-16, but I think it's the other way around. I think a lot of misinformation is out there from Bill C-16 because people don't do the research they should be doing about the bill. So I'll just start by going through what I initially wanted to start off. What I initially wanted to say about the bill. It goes a little in depth about the bill, so this will take a bit of time. Oh, that's fine. Okay. Bill C-16 amends the law to include gender identity and gender expression in two ways. One, it added gender identity and gender expression to the list of things that people can discriminate against according to the Canadian Human Rights Law Act. Second, I've read that it amended the criminal code so that a crime and could be elevated to a hate crime based on discrimination by gender identity and gender expression. According to the Canadian Justice Department website, the Canadian Justice Department website frequently asks questions on the bill. I think this could be based. Oh wait. Oh no, sorry, I said that. Okay, so that it could be that it causes the elevation, like possible elevation to hate crime based on discrimination by gender identity and gender expression, according to the Canadian Justice Department website frequently asked questions on the bill. I think this could be based around this part of the answer in the frequently asked questions. By the way, the question was, how would this bill change the law? The bill would also amend the criminal code to clarify that sentencing for a criminal offense may be greater if the offense was motivated by bias, prejudice, or hate based on gender identity or gender expression. I could read the other part of the answer if Jacob would want me to.
Yeah, you're welcome to continue. I don't think we have a disagreement, it seems, about
No, but I mean the rest of the answer. I could give you the rest of the answer if you want me to, but I could also just go further. It's up to you.
So I don't think we've disagreed about the fact that it.
No, I'm not done yet about what
Okay.
my problem is with the
Okay,
law.
so
But
please go
I'm
on.
just asking you if you want me to read up the whole answer from the Department of the Canadian Justice Department website, frequently asked questions, or is that part doesn't
Only
matter?
if you think it's relevant to your argument. You're free to continue on.
Okay. The definition of gender identity and gender expression is left purposely open. Wait. Okay, yeah. The definition of gender identity and gender expression is left purposely open. Courts, judges, lawyers, etc. can use existing laws in Canada to figure out what these terms mean, such as the Ontario Human Rights Commission, which is listed specifically on the on the DOG's website as an example of how the ambiguous terms would probably get interpreted. Right. Quotes from the frequently asked questions. It would amend the Canadian Human Rights Act to prohibit discrimination on the grounds of gender identity and gender expression. This amendment would give explicit protection to transgender and gender diverse people from discrimination in areas such as employment, opportunities, and access to goods and services. The bill would also amend the criminal code in two ways. It would prohibit hate propaganda against grounds that are identifiable based on gender identity or gender expression. This amendment concerns extremist literature or information that aims to incite hatred against a particular group and that is far outside what Canadian society will tolerate. The bill would also amend the criminal code to clarify that sentencing for a criminal offense may be greater if the offense was motivated by bias, prejudice or hate based on gender identity or gender expression. What
Sure.
does
I
gender
just
expression and gender
I just add to that also the incitement to genocide is also covered
okay.
under that.
What does gender expression and gender identity mean? You may be asking. Well, according to the Canadian Justice Department website, frequently asked questions on the bill, the definition of gender identity and gender expression is left purposely open. Courts, judges, lawyers, etc. can use laws that already exist to identify what these terms mean, like the Ontario Human Rights Commission, which was actually mentioned on the DOG's website as an example of how ambiguous terms would probably get interpreted. Quotes from the frequently asked questions that back this. In order to ensure that the law would be as inclusive as possible, the team's gender identity and gender expression are not defined in the bill. With very few exceptions, grounds of discrimination are not defined in legislation but are left to courts, tribunals, and commission to interpret and explain based on their detailed expression with particular cases. Definition of the terms gender identity and gender expression have already been given by the Ontario Human Rights Commission. For example, the Commission has provided helpful discussion and examples that can offer good practical guidance. The Canadian Human Rights Commission will provide similar guidance on the meaning of these terms in the Canadian Human Rights Act. So, if we can use the OHRC to determine how the court can interpret these things, then let's look at what the OHRC says.
Sure, as a guide. Yeah.
Pronouns here so the OHRC states the law recognizes that everyone has the right to self-identity, their gender, and that misgendering is a form of discrimination. Does the OHRC wait? What? Does the OHRC Though the OHRC goes even further than that, stating discrimination is not always direct and is often hard to detect. The claimant must hold up. The heck? Why can't I? Oh, okay. What? Okay. The claimant must show, on balance of probability, more likely than not, that adverse or negative treatment happened. The analysis should be flexible and look at all relevant factors in the situation, including circumstantial evidence as well as the full impact on the affected person or group. While there may be evidence of intent, this is not needed to prove discrimination, gender identity and expression, or other protected characteristics, and need only be one of the factors in a negative treatment for discrimination to exist. Once prima facie discrimination is established, the burden then shifts to organization or people responsible to either provide, well, it says person actually in the thing, responsible to either provide a credible, non-discriminatory explanation or justify the conduct or practical using one of the defenses available under the code.
So
Also, see Section 9 and 10 of this policy. From what I gather from reading this is that it isn't even necessary to prove intent, which is quite ridiculous in my opinion. Like, could you imagine how many people would be at the victim of getting fined by accidentally misgendering someone?
okay,
If all
so what you've
you
done
need.
is you spent a long time reading, right? But then what you're summarizing wasn't actually contained within what you read. So what you read was actually a protection that protects trans people from being discriminated by their employers, trans people being discriminated by their landlords, or by any government operated business. Okay?
Yeah.
In terms of hate speech and how it relates to hate speech, you in fact do need to provide a very strict proof of hate and intent. So here is a letter. Here's a letter written from the head of the Canadian Bar Association. So here he is, sort of giving his opinion. So for hate crimes, Bill C-16 adds gender identity or expression to the identifiable groups protected from those who advocate genocide, publicly incite hatred likely to lead to the breach of peace, or willfully promote hatred against them. So we're going to say that we don't want people to be allowed to advocate genocide for trans people. That we're going to say is bad. We're also going to say that publicly inciting hatred likely to lead to a breach of the peace is bad. So this is not just hatred. This is hatred that's going to lead to a breach of the peace. This is incredibly strong, kind of like, strong wording here. It's not just
Not
anything. This is going
particularly.
to likely lead to the breach of the peace, or willfully promote hatred. And we're talking about the willful promotion of hatred, not the accidental promotion of hatred, not, oh, I accidentally called you like a he when you're a she, or, some minor thing. This is the willful promotion of hatred. So narrowly confined offense, which suffers from neither an overbreadth nor vagueness, the provision possesses a stringent mens rea requirement, necessitating either an attempt to promote hatred or knowledge of the substantial certainty of such. It is also strongly supported by the conclusion that the meaning of the word hatred is restricted to the most severe and deeply felt form of opprobrium. Additionally, however, the conclusion that S319 bracket 2 represents a minimal impairment of the freedom of expression gains credence through the exclusion of the private conversation from its scope, the need for the promotion of hatred to focus on an identifiable group, and the presence of the defenses, blah, blah, blah. So basically what he's saying is that there is an incredibly stringent requirement that Jordan Peterson's claim that simply speaking the truth is going to be a matter of hate is actually specifically denied. If you believe what you're saying is the truth and you're not spreading hate, then you are, in fact, can say a number of things. So what we're talking about is the consistent harassment over the period of time of people.
Okay.
Being denied their rights, on a consistent basis by, let's say, a landlord, let's say by a school, let's say by, something like that, some institution.
The part where you don't let institutions discriminate against people in the sense of like not giving them certain things based on their sexual orientation is not particularly the problem I have with this bill. Problem I have with this bill is you said disturbance of peace would be as one of the things that would
let's say you led like a riot that
that's not particularly disturbing peace. Disturbing peace could also saying or inciting hatred could also just be saying something that is offensive but that you believe to be true while still being offensive.
No, that does not rise to the level of a hate crime. Does not.
Sorry?
No, that specifically does not rise to the level of a hate crime. So the distinction between the expression of repugnant ideas. Sorry, go ahead.
You like saying misgendering, let's say, someone, because that's the major issue that, let's say, what you brought up, Jordan Peterson had with this bill.
Okay,
is that misgendering?
Can I quote the Supreme Court of Canada for a sec?
Sorry.
So I'm going to quote the Supreme Court of Canada.
Okay? Hold on, but let me finish my thought.
Okay, but okay, sure.
So you brought up Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson's main issue was that misgendering a transgender person would could lead to getting a fine, and he actually also got written a letter from the OHRC.
So as a professor, someone who represents a university is providing something that's like a government regulated industry, blah blah blah, to consistently misgender a student.
He never misgendered a student.
But to do that would be, covered in this bill. You would be maybe fined for consistently refusing to misgender a student. Right?
Yeah, and I would say that's morally wrong.
As a representative of a business or as a professor. So
yeah, but that should be policy ingrained in the company itself. It shouldn't be enforced by law.
You don't think government mandated businesses should be governed by the government, though? Should that? If you work for the government, you don't think you should be covered by these laws? Is that what you're saying?
I don't think they should mandate you to use certain language. No.
So what they're doing is they're not mandating you to use certain language. They're saying you can't harass someone.
Yeah,
that's what they're saying. That's what they're saying.
As harassment.
No, it is. If you consistently harass someone by misgendering them like over and over and over again every day to the point of denying who they are, right? Who they've told you, they've expressed to you like, listen, I do not appreciate this. Maybe there was a misunderstanding at the beginning, but now I am this person. Please call me this. Please address me like this if you're going to address me. And then you refuse to respect them as an individual, just like if they were a black person and you were, consistently using racial epithets against them, that would be wrong. And you would be liable for fines or whatever. You'd be sanctioned by your university.
But
we would protect trans people in the exact same way. Or
I don't think so,
your religious debate. Like if you were at a religious faith, like a religious faith, as opposed to the other kinds of faith. But if you have a faith that is, maybe mocked or a minority faith, we wouldn't think it's okay if a professor were to mock you for it every day, right? Does that make sense?
Sorry, what did you say? Could you repeat that?
So if you consistently harass someone, if you, let's say they are a Mormon or something, right? If you constantly bring up, Joseph Smith or whatever, and how silly Mormonism is to them, like every day.
Mm-hmm.
That would be a form of like harassment, right? If you just have those views about Mormonism, you state them in a non-harassing manner to like your friend, or maybe to them once in a conversation, that would be one thing. But if you consistently every day are like, hey, Mormonism is stupid, you're an idiot, like blah, blah, blah. But yeah, then you're the professor of the class.
Yeah, but that's not the same thing, though.
No, that is the exact same thing.
Well, no, because harassment is when is aggressive pressure, intimidation. So if a professor would say, let's say, not believe that a trans woman was a real woman, and let's say he was religious and thought that because of faith, and therefore wasn't comfortable by calling this person, let's say, he, so he refers to that person as a she because that's what he thinks that person is, then he should be able to express his belief system just like that.
How do you feel?
That student,
What if I
that
was
just
a
like
phrenologist? What if I was a study of racial science and believed that Black people were actually just inferior to white people? Would I then be entitled to express my beliefs to them?
well, there's a
As a
different.
professor of
I
phrenology?
would say there's a well. Okay, so these are two different things, right? One thing is to actively, what I would actually call, harass someone by telling them over and over again how bad that person is for what it
Sure,
is.
sure. And that
And there
distinction is
and
made
the second
specifically
and
by the Supreme Court.
but that's not the same thing as calling someone that was born biologically a male a he. That's
Okay,
not the
and
same thing.
I and the Supreme Court of Canada agree with you, which is why they make that distinction. So the distinction between the expression of repugnant ideas and expression which exposes groups to hatred is crucial to understanding the proper application of hate speech prohibitions. Hate speech legislation is not aimed at discouraging repugnant or offensive ideas. It does not, for example, prohibit expression which debates the merits of reducing the rights of vulnerable groups in society. It only restricts the use of expression exposing them to hatred as part of that debate. It does not target the ideas, but their mode of expression in
So,
public and the
yeah.
effect that this
Well,
mode of
yes.
expression may have.
And the mode of expression would be misgendering someone.
No, that would be
Yes.
the content. The mode of expression would be a consistent pattern of harassment and
Well,
like
no.
consistently misgendering someone over the course of
Harassment is
a
never
long time.
named in the bill. In the bill goes mentions the OHRC, and that's just says if you misgender someone, then that's eligible for a fine. So that's not that, and that could also stir up um, or mess with the peace. I would say you could get an argument about it, but someone should still be able to voice his opinion, just like you just said.
Okay, I agree, which is why Bill 16 says nothing about you voicing your opinion. It's not an attack on that.
No, but it says that you can
So I think
discriminate
your
against.
opinion is like repugnant. I'm sure if we talked about like your opinion about trans people or something, we would have a lot of disagreements, right? But that's not what the debate is about.
Not
You
particularly.
can, I actually support your ability to like say, ideas that I disagree with, right? I'm for your freedom of expression, right? But if this dwells into hate propaganda, if it dwells into you promoting genocide, promoting ideas that are going
Calling
to
someone a he is not
break the
promoting
peace,
genocide.
I agree, which is why
And
your
that's not
ability
protected by Bill C-16. You can get fined for misgendering someone. The whole
as a
OHRC,
professor or
yeah,
a
that's what we're talking about.
landlord, if you are someone's landlord, let's say, and you have a gay person living in your apartment, right? If every single day they came home or whatever, you just, called them like the F slur or whatever, and in not a, like a joking way, it wasn't like anything you guys were cool with. It was like you harassing them. You consistently harassing them by doing that would provide an unsafe living environment for them. That would be actually like quite bad of you to do so. It would make them feel unsafe. It would make them feel like they weren't welcome. It would make them feel like, they're the one place they have, their home, is like, basically subject to the whim of like a landlord who hates them and could take it away, or, who knows, right? Like they have the key to their place.
Like I said, calling someone a he that's biologically a he is a lot different than actively, actively cursing at someone, or actively,
Okay, I agree with that. But
trying
actively calling someone a he in a
no,
harassing mode.
if you believe that someone is a he, that it was biologically born a he, and that person
Okay, but what is
wants
preventing
to stay
you?
in your home, or wants to stay in a house that you bought, then you should be able to deal with his difference of opinion.
Okay, what is keeping you from keeping that opinion to yourself, though?
Yeah, but that's
I'm
the
saying
thing.
don't share that opinion in a harassing way. If you have that opinion, that's fine. If you want to speak about that opinion in a non-harassing way, that's fine. But the
Well,
second you are harassing someone with your opinion, it becomes harassment.
yeah,
You
but
agree?
okay, look, if somebody okay, so if somebody comes to your class or wants to live in a home where you live, where that's yours and you're a landlord,
Mm-hmm.
then you can't. That person wants to live in a house that you own, so that you're gonna have to go in conversation with that person. Now, if you believe that that person is a he, then this law would mandate you to call them a she. So you would have to express an opinion that you don't share, which is going against the whole ideology of being able to
You,
voice your opinion.
you don't
Like
need to. You don't need to talk to
calling
them at all.
someone. What? Sorry.
You just don't need to refer to them in that way at all. You could just call them by their name.
What if
Now,
you don't know their name?
or you could ask them. Now,
Yeah.
let's go
Well,
through the exact test.
from
Let's go through the exact test that sees if something
personal
is.
experience, I know that quite a lot of people, that decent amount of people don't have the easiest times
So,
remembering first names.
so can we go over in Canadian law what the test is for determining if something is a valid case of discrimination? Because I think it's pretty clear. So, let's say there's a case. You belong to some minority group, you get fired from your job, and then you go to you go to the Canadian Human Rights Council, or the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal, to determine if it was a case of harassment or discrimination. So here are the three things. So one, that the employer adopted the standard for purpose rationally connected to the performance of the job. So was the employer doing it for a rational reason? Did they fire you because you were doing badly at your job? Okay. Did the employer discriminate against you in an honest and good faith belief that it was necessary for the fulfillment of a work-related purpose, or not? So did they have an honest and good faith belief that they were not rationally discriminating against you? And third, standard was reasonably necessary to the accomplishment of legitimate work-related purpose. So showing that the standard is reasonably necessary. It must be demonstrated that it's impossible to accommodate the individual employee sharing the characteristics of the claimant without imposing undue hardship on the employer. So you're basically saying that I can't accommodate you. It is unreasonable. It puts undue hardship on me. So I think what our case here is you believe that it's an undue hardship to not misgender trans people. Perhaps it is a like as Jordan Peterson says, a requirement to actively speak instead of a certain way, instead of simply not speak in a certain way. I would debate that. I would say that calling someone by the things they ask you to call them, demonstrating a minimum of respect, is no way an undue hardship. So things that would be undue hardships for an employer would be like constructing a giant ramp at extreme expense because you have a wheelchair, but like the circumstances of the office are such that it would be like outrageously expensive to construct a ramp. But A small ramp would not be an undue hardship. And in fact, an employer might have to construct a small ramp, right? Now, I think we can say that not actively misgendering someone as a matter of harassment is in no way like constructing an outrageously gigantic ramp. It's actually much similar to maybe constructing a tiny ramp, or maybe even just minimally not harassing someone, because you are also required not to call someone terrible racial slurs, or required not to do all of these things. So even by your standard of being forced to do something, it's still not an undue hardship.
Yeah, but you're going off of the assumption that misgendering someone is harassment, but you have yet to explain how misgendering someone, let's say a boy that transitioned to
distant
a woman,
misgendering of someone and a denying of someone the way that they have requested to be treated would be a matter of harassment by someone you are obligated to continue interacting with, like a landlord or an employer.
Well,
right?
yes, but that's
every
not
time
the
you showed
definition
up
of
for
harassment.
work, so if every time you showed up at work,
people
Captain,
don't get treated the way they don't want to all the time. You can't mandate someone to treat you the way you want to. That's not how the world works.
In terms of treating you in a non-discriminatory or harassing manner,
that's not
actually, yes. That's why we have laws.
How is misgendering someone discrimination?
Well, when it becomes a consistent harassment, it would be. For example, every time you showed up at work, can I give you an example?
Jacob, you can't just use a word like harassment.
Okay, I'll explain.
Onto something without explaining in what way it is aggressive pressure or intimidation onto someone.
Okay, so let me explain why it would be harassment, and this actually would apply to you. So imagine if every time you showed up for work and your boss just called you like, "Hey, little lady," and just like called you like the feminine version of your real name. I don't know what it is, but like,
okay, but that's
right.
Like
that's
going
like,
to
oh,
the
Mrs.
extreme. Let's just say he called you a she.
Okay, Mrs. Natsuina. Now, if I can do that because I'm not your employer, but if I was your employer, I could call you, if I was misgendering
you're lagging a bit for me.
A little lady. Oh, am I lagging? So if I was lagging, I apologize. If I was your employer, if I were able to call you, okay, should be unmuted now. So if I was your employer and I was misgendering you every day, that would be wrong, right? As a matter of harassment. So similarly, I couldn't misgender someone else as a matter of harassment.
You were like lagging for me, so I went out and went in, so didn't really hear what you said.
Okay. So do you hear me now?
Yeah. So how would a landlord calling a biological male that transitioned to a female, he, let's say, be a harassment
in the same way? Okay, so let's just we'll go through it again because you didn't hear. So in the same way that if every time you talk to your landlord or your boss, they called you Mrs. Natsu and referred to you as a little lady and constantly referred to you as she.
But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about if someone
this is an analogy. So
no. If someone calls a trans male just as she, don't go to the extremes, because this is where a part where I have the problem with this bill. If a landlord says she, which is not offensive in any way, calling someone a she.
Okay.
In some way it might be offensive for the person, but it isn't an offensive term.
Okay, if I called you
if he calls you a she, how is that harassment?
If I called you a she every day at work as your boss,
I wouldn't care.
You would not care?
No.
Well,
how is that harassment? How is that being aggressive?
I would say that whether or not you would specifically care, that kind of mockery based on your gender identity would be wrong and would actually be protected under that such things that protect
Okay,
workplace
but you
harassment.
called it you called it harassment and discrimination. If you're going to make a
Yes.
positive claim like that, you have to explain how it's harassment or discrimination.
Okay. Because in the same way that calling you she to deny something that you have requested, you've expressed, this is how I want to be called, to deny that, to insist upon your own set that you're essentially name calling. So to call names repeatedly would be a matter of harassment, right?
That's
I think
not
that's
that's
pretty.
no naming people very
So to
very
call
offensive
names,
things
if I
may be
call you,
harassment if you do it
if I,
over and over again. But
yeah,
there's a difference between you believing that somebody is actually biologically a female, so calling that person a she, and someone actively trying to
why
to
does your
harass,
belief,
actually trying to harass that person and diminish their, let's say, self-confidence. There's a big difference in that. If, let's say,
I
like,
so
let's
I
say,
agree, and that is why it is covered
no, it's not.
by the Supreme
If a
Court, right?
landlord, if a landlord,
That distinction I made does discriminate between the exact thing you're talking about, right? If you just want to say, like, in my personal opinion, trans people don't exist or whatever, like, because you're
no,
talking
yeah,
with
but
your
that's not the
friend,
same thing.
that's fine.
Misjudging someone is in this would be a form of
No,
discrimination.
no, it would not
So
be. It
you
has to
said
be a willful.
misgendering.
No, it would have to be a willful misgendering on a consistent
Yes.
harassing basis.
No,
Yes.
harassment wasn't used in the term.
No, a
That's
consistent
I
basis
haven't
that
read that
rises
one.
to the level of harassment.
No, that's
Yes.
harassment hasn't been named. Discussion.
No, that's
Well,
literally
by
the
you, but not by
entire
the
bill.
actual text.
So for something to constitute these things, it has to rise to the level of like a willful discrimination that does not put undue hardship on the employer. I think we've
Yeah,
shown pretty clearly that you just simply stating something you believe to be the truth once is not something that would be covered, whereas you consistently doing it on a day-to-day basis where you make that person's life like a living hell would be, right?
no, okay. Look, if somebody is actively trying to um diminish the person's self-confidence by repeatedly like shouting uh, by repeatedly
Misgendering
cursing,
statements.
let's say, by let's
Misgen-
say repeatedly cursing at that person, then I
Mhm.
would say, okay, that may be going too far, right?
Okay, so
But
what you're doing
what,
is you're refusing to call someone by the terms they have requested to be called
yes, but
in a
you don't,
professional setting, right?
yeah,
And so you're being unprofessional. You're being
okay,
unjust. You're refusing to
no,
give someone the same respect they would provide you. And I think it's disgusting, right? It's
well,
both repugnant, but then
okay,
it also rises to the level of harassment.
whether or not you think it's disgusting, that doesn't mean that it's harassment or
I
discrimination.
agree. I agree.
Look,
Which is why it has to be
that's the
both.
point. That's the point. I don't think that an ideology that states like, if you disagree with me, then I will fine you. I don't think that's a fair representation of how the justice system should work.
And
And
I
this
agree, and that's why that
bill,
this is
and
not
well,
actually how
well,
this
this
bill was
bill,
constructed, nor what this bill says
yes,
in
it
any
is.
way. No,
This
it does
in
not.
accord
You
with this
can
bill.
believe the Jordan Peterson misinformation if you want.
It's not
But what you're doing
misinformation.
now is I've
I
presented
laid
you.
out a very
Wait,
I
what's
laid out a
happening now?
case.
What's
I
happening now is that I've presented you with the actual text of the bill. I've shown you why it doesn't actually apply to the things you think it does apply to. Now it's
no,
actually a just
you
law,
okay,
right?
okay, Jacob.
No,
You're changing your stance. You
no,
just said that
no.
you
I'm
that
explaining to
if
you what's happened in this argument
no
because I
no
think we're
no
moving
Jacob
towards the end of it, right? So
Jacob you said
I
no
presented
Jacob that
you facts about
wait
what this law is, but right
me
now
too.
you're clinging to what Jordan Peterson sold you the law to be,
I
right?
haven't. I have. You're the only one that has mentioned Jordan Peterson did. You're
Right,
the one who
because
mentioned Jordan
you
Peterson.
right, but
I didn't
you've
use any
gotten your
text of
information
Jordan
from
Peterson.
him, yet
What?
you've gotten your information from
No,
him,
I
right? His
didn't.
point of view
Well,
from him, I
no, no,
assume.
no.
So you
No,
live in the
no,
Netherlands, right? But
no.
yet you are very concerned about like a Canadian bill for some reason, right?
Well,
The only reason that
that's
it's
not an
popular is because
argument,
of
though.
Jordan Peterson and the
No.
misinformation that exists because of him, right?
Okay,
So I think
Jacob,
invoking him is in no way a red herring. It's actually
can,
like
can
the
I
very
speak?
center of your argument. Okay.
Jacob, can I speak, please? Okay. One, I didn't get my information on what the bill actually means predominantly from Mr. Peterson. I just searched up on the internet how this, because I had heard from Jordan Peterson that this was an infringement on the freedom of speech. And I did get popularized by Peterson, but I did actually look at what was backing his claims. And what is backing his claims is pretty clear. The bill says that you can't discriminate on the basis of gender identity and gender expression. It references the OHRC to state like this is how it can be interpreted, and lawyers and all these other things, etc., can base it around the OHRC in law. Now, what does the OHRC says? It says misgendering a person is a form of discrimination. So misgendering a person, according to this bill, would be a form of discrimination. That's just a fact. You can look back. I can send you the links of the OHARC's quotes, like I've quoted them,
Right.
and I can
Okay.
send you links
So
of
let me
of
again.
what it says. And you agreed that calling the landlord that in the situation of the landlord, I'm not sure. Wait, does the human rights is the human rights only in institutions or is it all around? I don't know. You know more about Canadian law than I do.
Right. It applies to it does not apply to individuals on the street. It applies
So
to certain things that are protected,
human so the
such
human
as
so the
such
human
as
rights code does not protect against um
so it does
oh,
protect
oh,
all Canadians. All Canadians have certain human rights, is what
okay,
it does.
yeah, and
And those would apply. But certain of those human
yeah,
rights are like the right to like to have a home rented from a landlord that's not discriminating against you. That's something that applies to all humans, all Canadians.
wait, no. But doesn't the human rights code also imply just for all Canadians?
It does. It applies for all Canadians, and it
Yeah.
says that all Canadians have the right to not be discriminated against in their place of
Okay, so don't bring
residence.
up the landlord and landlord.
No,
It's a
because of
lot
that
broader
right.
than this.
No, because of that right, landlords now have an obligation not to discriminate people against
Well,
people.
everybody doesn't have the opportunity to what you would call discriminate against others, right?
No, no, that's not what's covered. What is covered is in your place of residence, you have the right to not have your landlord fuck with
But
you,
you
right?
just said that the human rights code is
Therefore,
accessible for
landlords.
everyone. Nobody is allowed to
I agree.
discriminate.
So a landlord, if the landlord rented
But that's
their
how
home
is
from
that
another
just
landlord, they too would be. Uh,
okay? They too, but then the law would also reconcile for other normal people running around the street. If the human right, they would not be able to discriminate on the basis of gender identity and gender expression, right?
no. So
Okay,
if you,
what determines discrimination? What determines discrimination? One form of that is misgendering someone.
I agree. So if your
Okay,
landlord misgenders you
so if
consistently on a matter but not simply once. So let me make a very clear distinction here. One where I'm actually quoting the head of the Canadian Bar Association, like the very, very powerful lawyer, Canada. So those compelled to speak and act in truth, however unpopular, truth is included in those defenses of freedom of speech. Okay? Or not freedom of
wait,
speech. There's no
can you
freedom of
repeat
speech.
that, please?
All right. So we're talking about what is and what isn't allowed. So we're talking about how you need to actually
Wait,
prove
can you
intent.
repeat that, please?
Right, I will. So we're talking about having to prove the intent of this hate speech for it to be considered. So for those compelled to speak and act in truth, however unpopular, truth is included in those defenses, the defenses that would justify your statement. Nothing in the section compels the use or avoidance of particular words in public as long as they are not used in their most extreme manifestations, with the intention, in italics, of promoting the level of abhorrence, delegitimization, and rejection that produces feelings of hatred against identifiable groups.
Okay, so misgendering someone is a form of discrimination according to the Canadian law. So
only if you intend to promote hatred,
if you
delegitimization, or
intend,
rejection.
not if you intend, if
with
you
the
provoke
intention.
hatred
No,
while misgendering someone.
With
Yes.
the intention. No, with the intention.
You have to
with
have
the intention
the
is in
intent
all italics.
Jacob,
okay?
You're misunderstanding this. You have to have the intent of misgendering someone, not the intent of making someone's life miserable.
So if you are misgendering someone because you believe, however foolishly, that it is the true position, that biological sex is like the only thing that matters, somehow that we need to be obsessed with genitals, and that's like how we should just choose how we refer to people in all cases. Perhaps we should, check people's genitals before they go into the bathroom. Okay, you think that's true? Okay, that's fine. That's your mistaken opinion. Okay,
yeah, but you're still allowed to misgender someone.
If you say the exact same things with the intention of promoting hatred against identifiable groups, then that's not okay.
Dude, that's not true. If you have the intention of misgendering someone, then that's a form of discrimination according to the bill. Now, discrimination,
willful and consistent misgendering someone with the intent of promoting hatred. Do you see how what the truth is one thing, and then you are like back here in like a Mott and Bailey argument where
you're misinterpreting what that sentence means, and you're just totally not looking at what the bill actually says. I explained to you how the bill says that that misgendering someone is a form of discrimination.
The bill does not say that. The bill absolutely
not the bill literally,
does not say that.
The Canadian law says that, not the bill.
Okay, which law? Which law says that?
Okay, I'll go through it again.
Are you referencing the Ontario Human Rights Act, which is supposed to be used as a loose guide? Is that what you're using? Is that what you're quoting as the text of Bill C-16? So what part of Canadian law does say that?
I was quoting. Hold up. I was quoting the Department of Justice, the Canadian Department of Justice. The Canadian Department of Justice says. Okay, let me bring up the quote.
Okay, just again, the Supreme Court of Canada has already made this distinction. The distinction between repugnant ideas and those which express.
Okay, dude. You have come with one particular person that has said that, and he said you needed intent and he means with intent, he means intent to misgender someone, and if that results in provoking that person, then that's discrimination. It's not you need to have intent for hatred, because you can't measure that. You can't go back in time, take a ruler and measure the amount of want of hatred. That's not possible.
So in the case of murder, would you say that intent doesn't matter, and that's not in fact how we would distinguish between? Oh, okay. So in murder, we can go back magically and measure intent.
No, but you can't say the murder was based on hatred. That's just a conclusion that you can take. Sure,
no,
but that's not actually part of the law.
It actually is. There's the Bill C-16 extends trans discrimination as a aggravating factor in sentencing for murder.
Okay. You brought up a perfect example. You said shooting someone is a form of the intent is necessary. That is true. So if you're going to shoot, they have to see or you have the intent of shooting that person, or if you just accidentally hit the gun. But what they don't measure is the intent to the extent of hatred that you want to pursue.
No, they actually do.
This bill actually specifically
does do that.
My sentence. Let me finish my sentence. Look, they look at the intent. They look at the if you had the intent of misgendering someone, but they nowhere it says they look at the intent for the amount of hatred that you have towards a particular group, or they measure
they
the
do.
intent of the amount you wanted to provoke hatred amongst that group. Where does it say that? Show me, because it doesn't. It just says you need to have the intent of misgendering someone, just like you need to have the intent of shooting someone. But that doesn't explain how it's discriminatory or how it's harassment.
Okay, so let's go just into, again,
Yeah,
to remind everyone.
Answer the question. Where does it say that?
Let's read what Bill C-16 does. Okay.
I already told you what it does.
So it expands these things from the Canadian Rights Act to include gender expression and identity, and also to the criminal code, provisions dealing with hate propaganda, incitement to violence, and aggravating factors in sentencing. What could those aggravating factors in sentencing be? So we go down, we look. Well, it turns out that if you kill someone and it's a hate crime, your crime was motivated by racial intolerance, let's say. You hate black people, so you killed a black person, or you hate native people, you killed a native person. You hate gay people, you killed a gay person. You hate trans people, you killed a trans person. Those things are all aggravated factors. And actually, if you commit a hate crime, it's actually much, much worse. And we sentence you for longer periods of time.
Sorry, what?
So if you commit a hate crime against a specific minority group, we consider that worse. And therefore, we give you more time in jail or in prison. It's an aggravating factor in sentencing. So a murder is still a murder, but the intent which lay behind it actually is like pretty much the only, the thing that would distinguish it from like a first degree from a second degree, or like a murder and manslaughter.
But that's
a hate crime or not a hate crime.
Okay, but that doesn't answer the question. That doesn't answer the question. The proof of burden, the burden of proof, is for you here to show where it says in the bill or in the Department of Justice in Canada, where it states that you need to have the intent of inciting violence towards a specific group in order for it to be validated as discrimination.
Okay.
That you can't take a different law and say, well, they do it here, so maybe they'll do it here.
So
no,
again,
you have to actually show the law.
Let me quote the Supreme Court of Canada again.
Okay, but it's going to have the same effect. He never says it.
No, the Supreme Court of Canada.
Yeah, but he never says it. He never says what you're claiming. So go.
The Supreme Court of Canada does.
Yeah, but go with the quote. He doesn't mean what you think.
The distinction between the expression of repugnant ideas and expression which exposes groups to hatred is crucial to understanding the proper application of hate speech prohibitions.
Okay, so he says, wait, quote that again, part again.
Hate speech legislation is not aimed at discouraging repugnant or offensive ideas. It does not, for example, prohibit expression which debates the merits of reducing the rights of vulnerable groups in society. So we could be like, maybe we should just take away these rights to trans people. That's what we're debating now. That's not
what he said. What he says essentially means is you're allowed to have the opinion that, let's say, transgender people are bad or whatever, right? They can have dumb opinions, but they'll be dumb, okay? According to that. But what it's not saying is, or what he may think, or what you may think in that scenario. But what he's not saying is, you need to have the intent of inciting hatred amongst the transgender community in order for it to be discrimination when you misgender someone. All he is saying is you're still allowed to have your opinions. You're still allowed to have your beliefs. You're still allowed to say your beliefs in certain ways without inciting hatred towards, or without discriminating against transgender people where they stand, I guess. But
I agree.
But that still doesn't change the fact that the Canadian government sees misgendering someone as discrimination. So whether or not you find you have ill intent of provoking hatred among the among the trans community or whatever, when you misgender that person, you're creating hatred in their community according to this. So the effect is important, not what you intended to do. So you're still allowed to voice your opinion according to this in undiscriminatory manners, you can say, and not in front of them. Well, maybe in front of them, but not in discriminatory manners. Well, what is a discriminatory manner according to the Canadian law is when you misgender someone, and that is in the law. That's just not. That's
So that
ingrained in the law
is
in the
not.
sense that that's a
So
form
one,
of discrimination which is not allowed.
right.
So what I said,
Captain, I can't let you get away with that because that's not in the law. It's not referred to anywhere. What the law
yes, it
covers
is.
are extreme manifestations. So nothing in this section compels the use or avoidance of particular words in public,
No, I know.
as
So
long as they
you
are not
can,
used in their most extreme manifestations with the intention of promoting a level of abhorrence, delegitimization, and rejection that produces feelings of hatred against identifiable groups.
So
It's not.
it's not your intent of providing hatred. It's if that hatred manifests. So if you say
No,
if
you
you
need
call
both. You need both. You need to
no,
have
you
both
don't.
intent
You don't need me.
and
I can say I'll go back to the example of, let's say, Jordan B. Peterson, who you brought up. He says his opinions and people get offended. That's a lot different than him trying to provoke people and then they getting offended. That's the same thing here. It's not that that people getting offended or that your intent of offending someone is in the law, against the law, but it's the actions that you commit
all right. So
towards that group,
for the
which
sake of
cause the
chat,
hatred
for the
and
sake of
which
chat,
cause
for the
the
sake of chat, we're
discriminatory
gonna have
action.
to interrupt and just say like Fawcett may be dying here. So yes, you need both intent and harm, right?
No. Well,
Yes.
yes. You need,
Yes.
but there's a distinction here. You need intent to misgender someone. You don't need intent to provoke someone. That's totally separate.
For something to rise to the level of a hate crime, and
Yeah,
and
you need.
to distinguish between things that are said with the assumption that they are true and things said with the intention of promoting hate. So if I say something terrible with the assumption, because I'm an idiot, that it's true, that's different than if I say the same exact thing with the intention of spreading hatred for this group that I dislike.
Yes.
Right?
And spreading hatred, again, according to the Canadian law, is when you intentionally misgender someone.
No.
Yeah.
No.
How is that not?
Misgendering is the act here of what you're saying. So if you misgender someone because you believe in your heart of hearts, however incorrectly, that it is the true statement that you can make, and I'm never gonna not say a true statement because an upright lobster bears his chest to the world. If that's the laurels you want to rest on, that's fine. But if you are doing it because you just hate a certain group and you want to promote misknowledge or hatred, spread hate, that would be spreading hate and therefore a hate crime or like covered under
No,
these.
you can. No, okay. We have to address this. Okay, so you're saying if you misgender someone, but you just believe it to be true, it's not discriminating, but that's not true. What that quote said was when you incite hatred. I believe was the word used incite hatred? I'm not too sure.
With the intention of promoting a level of abhorrence, delegitimization, and rejection that produces feelings of hatred.
Yeah. So if 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 a community, if you produce hatred into a community by misgendering someone, which according to the Canadian law is discriminating against that group, then you would be discriminating against someone's gender identity or expression.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So discriminating against someone's identity or expression by the Canadian law, according to Bill C-16,
with the intent
which
to
we are
provoke hate.
discussing, is open to getting a fine.
Yeah, if you spread hate if you
Yes, if
speak
you
with the
spread
intention of
hate,
spreading hate,
you can get a fine, or if you disturb the peace.
I mean, okay, yeah, if you
Okay,
promote a group of
so
people to
now
disturb the peace,
now we go back to the initial problem we have is if I believe that transgender female is actually a boy, so I don't want to call that transgender she because that goes against my morality sense of morality, and that's not how I want to voice my opinions or voice the way I speak. Then and that so you refer to that person as a he. Then how is that a form of discrimination and harassment? Because you labeled it as both. Yeah, if you're going to make the positive claim, you have to actually show me why it's harassment and discrimination. You
okay. I
can't
mean,
just say it
I
is
see what you're getting
harassment or
at.
discrimination. That's not an argument.
Okay, so I kind of see what you're getting at here. I think to provide you some charity. So to do that, just in your own private home or in your own private setting or in a non-harassing way, you would be totally legitimate to doing so, although I think mistaken. Now, if you are a landlord and you're
No,
providing someone a
no,
hostile
don't go
living
back to the
environment,
landlord. You just said that the human rights code is not just for institutions. It's for all Canadians. So go for the
no.
example where all
So,
Canadians are involved.
okay, so you misunderstood. So the Human Rights Code does apply to all Canadians, but it says in that code that landlords have to do certain things because everyone has certain rights to an undiscriminatory living arrangement.
Yeah,
Does that
but
make
it's
sense?
not. But in the bill, it
So,
doesn't say
so I am
landlords can't
protected.
do this and this. It says
So with a right,
you're not allowed to discriminate.
so with rights come obligations, right? So if I have a right not to be murdered, then you have the obligation not to murder me. And if you wanted to murder me, you can't now. Fuck. Or you'll go to jail, right? So with my right to have live in like a discriminatory free housing, right? You as a landlord have the obligation to provide me with discriminatory free housing. So if you want to consistently misgender me, which is, as a landlord, the only interaction we need to
No.
have is like,
Why do
here's
you
your
go back
rent.
to the landlord? You just said that the Human Rights Code applies for every Canadian. In the Human
No,
Rights Code, it says you're not allowed to discriminate
dude,
on the basis of
you're
gender
unable
expression
to
and gender
understand.
identity.
So you seem to be unable to understand this point. So it applies to all Canadians in that all Canadians have the right to not be harassed by their landlord. Does that make sense to you?
So,
So you have a right not to be harassed by your employer, no matter who you are. If you are
wait,
a
so
landlord
in Canada,
and you rent
okay,
a house from another landlord, that landlord can't discriminate against you.
so I have a question. In Canada, because there's also you're not allowed
It explicitly does
discriminate
not
against races,
apply
right?
to just two Joe Schmoes on the street having a conversation. It does not apply to that. It doesn't apply to any thoughts you want to have in your head. It doesn't apply to any statements you make on the behalf of truth, no matter how foregone that conclusion or how repugnant those ideas.
Um, um, do you think I can search up where that's actually accurate? Wait, let me just search that up.
Okay, so I think we should go to closing statements here
No,
because
no, no.
I gotta provide I got another debate soon coming up. Do you have anything you want to say before we go to closing statements? I'll let you.
Yeah, I have a lot.
Oh, you've got a lot. Okay, all right, go for it, dude.
First, I want to check whether that's actually true.
See, the thing is, there's just a lot of misinformation about this bill that's been put out there, and I would say that this misinformation, I can't speak to its intent, but its effect is certainly to spread a certain amount of fear about trans people. You could call it even transphobic. Um, so I would put it to you that there's no reason there's no reason to fear expanding Canadian Human Rights Act to include, trans people, to include gender expression, gender identity. You, in fact, when you relate to people on a face-to-face basis, you don't look at their sexuality. You don't examine their chromosomes. You don't check out their junk. You look at someone, you maybe make an assumption, but you go on the gender, the gender presentation of the individual, and what that individual tells you that they like to be called. And to respect someone is to, give them the basic courtesy of calling them by their name, by referring to them by like the pronoun that they specifically tell you that they'd like to be called, if it comes down to it.
Okay, but I'm not. I don't. I see that the Canadian human. It says here in Canada, human rights are protected by federal provinces and tolerated law. To territorial laws. Canada's human rights laws stem from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In 1948, John Humphrey, a Canadian lawyer and scholar, played a significant role in writing the declaration. When it was complete, the declaration provided a list of 30 articles outlining everyone's universal human rights. The first two articles are about equality and freedom from discrimination, the foundation of the Canadian Human Rights Act. It doesn't say that they're that they have freedom from discrimination only on institutionalized situations. So where's the proof that it's only for institutionalized situations?
Where is the proof?
Yeah. I just read for what I found what it's about it, but I didn't see that it was only based around institutionalized situations.
Okay.
I mean,
okay, we're just going off Wikipedia here. The Canadian Human Rights Act applies throughout Canada, but only to federally regulated activities. Each province and territory has its own anti-discrimination law that applies to activities that are not federally regulated.
Okay, but then in institutionalized situations, but that wouldn't just be a landlord. That would also just be colleagues.
It would be what?
It would also just be colleagues. It wouldn't just be a landlord.
It would be colleagues. So if you were at work,
so if you discriminate against a colleague in an institution, then that would still be discrimination.
Yeah, because you're at work.
Okay, so you can go off with your closing statement.
Okay, so yeah, it would apply to colleagues at work because trans people, just like everyone else, have the right to work in a harassment-free situation. Just like a woman has the right to go to work without being sexually harassed, a trans person has the right to go to work without being harassed for their gender expression or identity. Okay, so I think, a failure of mine is maybe I didn't come with this debate with enough to say, because I sort of thought that explaining what this law did, kind of like showing their clear limits that show that what you're scared of isn't going to happen, is not really covered by this law. And that even like things that I might argue for, like just treating trans people with respect, aren't even covered by this law. Like this only applies to federally regulated institutions, right? Specifically. And it only applies to intent.
It said
intent to essentially delegitimize.
I have a question. In the Wikipedia page, did it say did it say federal institutions or did it say institutions?
Federally regulated institutions.
Okay.
Federally regulated activities.
Can you send me that Wikipedia?
Sure.
Hi.
Okay. Okay. So, yeah, my closing statement, I think, is going to be pretty simple. I think, I kind of maybe failed a little bit in not having enough to say to you, because I think, I'm trying to calm your fears here, is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to say, like, this is just very reasonable. We've already agreed as a society that, like, if you go into the store and you're gay and someone doesn't want to make you a cake, they want to refuse you service on that fact. Just like if you were black, or if you were a Protestant or a Catholic or a Scientologist, well, maybe not. That would be discrimination, and we would consider it wrong, and that you would actually be protected from facing that discrimination by our federal law. So this law is important because not all provinces and territories share the same human rights acts, so covered by the same thing. So, for example, if you're trans and in the Yukon Territory, before this law came about, you were pretty much out of luck. Manitoba and Saskatchewan also had less protections. So what this does is it makes it uniform across Canada. In these federally regulated activities, you are protected. I think that is a good law. Fundamentally, one that provides universal protections for people that we all like for ourselves.
Okay, is that your closing statement?
Yeah, I'm done.
Okay. So Jacob's main argument is that in an institutionalized situation, misgendering someone would be a sign of harassment and discrimination, and that's why this bill is warranted. Now, I have about 7 points to why I think that that kind of ideology or that sense would be immoral, let's say. But aside from those, I would say Jacob hasn't brought any arguments to why discrimination or how misgendering someone is a form of discrimination or harassment. And if you're going to make the positive claim that misgendering someone is a form of discrimination and harassment, because he put it as both, then you have to actually make an argument to why those are discriminatory and a form of harassment. So that having said, I'll go through my points. 1. Free speech is the mechanism that people use to settle their differences in a civil society. And if people can't, then that could unstable the civil society. 2. These pronouns aren't being picked up in the usual way words get picked up. You see, words are like tools. If it is a good tool, people will pick it up. If it isn't, they won't. This is transparent with the pronouns, as they are probably seen as somewhat, to some extent, as pretty ridiculous, so people don't pick them up, like the pronouns as these. Or I've talked to people that are even for LGBTQ rights, and they were also like, yeah, those are kind of ridiculous. I don't stand behind those. Now the far leftists aren't happy with the with that and want to literally enforce these words onto the people, which is a great violation of people's freedom of speech. As this was the first time actually, it wasn't really the first time in English history, so I'll skip that part. 3. People should be able to voice their opinions even if other people don't like your position. 4. This is literally forcing people to abide by the position the far leftists have. Like people say, it's just a way to show kindness in some sense, acting as if it isn't a political way to get a sense of verbal dominance over the opponent. 5. These laws are centered around kindness, but kindness in many scenarios isn't most important to enforce. At times, truth is a lot more important at times, and being able to voice what you believe as truth. Not saying that trans women aren't actual women. That's not my point. I'm just saying that if you believe that a trans woman isn't a biological woman, and therefore you want to call them a she, then abiding by your principle of truth, then that would be more important than surrendering to a false sense of kindness. 6. It's a fundamental method by which society maintain the stability that they maintain. Well, that's a bit similar to 1. I don't know why I put that there. So I'll call 7 6. It's not even a good strategy to deal with discrimination, because at least if people are discriminatory, then you can point it out and express how someone is ill-informed or how someone's standpoint isn't moral. But if you tell discriminatory, well, if if you believe it's immoral, you can tell why you believe it's immoral. But if you tell but if you say discriminatory people, if you tell discriminatory people that they can't voice their opinions, what do you think will happen? You think people will all of a sudden not be discriminatory? Of course not. They'll just express it in a more sneaky way, in ways you might not be easily able to define. Okay, so I think I've laid out a pretty solid case for reasons for why this is a quite immoral standpoint, immoral law to have, and why it's a bad law. And my last, I would like to end with a quote of a quote. Wait, if I can find the quote. Okay. I believe this was from the Supreme Court of Canada. Anything that forces someone to express opinions that are not their own is a penalty. That is totalitarian and, as such, alien to the traditions of free nations like Canada, even for the repression of the most serious crimes. So basically, this is the Supreme Court of Canada laying a case for me to why Bill C-16 is against their own policies. Okay, I would that will be my end.
Cool, very cool. Well, yeah, thanks so much for agreeing to debate me.